Hey guys, I hope y'all are having a wonderful day today. So we're going to be talking all about cakey foundation and how we can prevent it. So I'm going to be sharing with y'all my best tips and tricks to prevent our foundation from getting cakey during the day. And these tips and tricks are going to be geared toward those of us who have oily, acne-prone skin. And in the process, I'm going to be showing y'all how I came up with my look for today. So let's jump right into it. Okay guys, so the first step you have to take to make sure that your foundation is not going to cake up on you during the day, you definitely want to start with a really good skincare regimen, and that includes your morning and your nighttime routine. So just remember that whatever you're doing with your skin at night, you're prepping it for the next day, whether you're wearing makeup or not. But for morning and night, you want to make sure that your skin is nice and cleansed, nice and moisturized. Even if you have oily skin, it's a good idea to incorporate oils into your makeup routine. And yes, that might sound counterproductive, but if you're adding oils into your routine, that will actually help prevent your skin from overproducing oil during the day. So I personally like using avocado oil on my face, on my body, and in my hair. But I will put all of my skincare products in the description box in case you want to know what I use. But whatever you use, just make sure that your skin is nice and prepped before you start putting on makeup. Even if you have some texture going on, just make sure that your skin is as smooth as possible before you start putting on makeup. Now, I usually don't use foundation primers because I like to rely on my skincare to prime my skin. But for those of you who do like using primer, I would suggest using one that's meant to smooth the surface of your skin, because if you have a base that's as smooth as possible, that's definitely going to cut down on texture, and that's definitely going to cut down on caking. So make sure that you're using something that's smoothing your skin out. If you have oily skin, yes, you can use a mattifying primer, but just make sure you're not using too many products in one makeup routine that's meant to mattify the skin. If you do that, your skin could overproduce oil during the day because you have so many products on there that are helping to keep your skin dry, and then your skin is going to think that it's drier than it actually is, and you might end up getting more shiny during the day. So yes, you can use a mattifying primer, just don't go overboard with the mattifying stuff, and just make sure that your primer is nice and hydrating, and also one that's going to smooth the surface of your skin. So of course, the type of foundation that you use is really important as well. I think liquid foundations just naturally look less textured than powders just because they are a liquid. That's not to say that you can't wear a powder foundation without getting cakey, but I think there's less of a chance of your makeup caking up on you if you go with the liquid foundation. And because I have oily skin, I also want to pick a foundation that's nice and hydrating, because all of that extra hydration will help to keep my skin nice and hydrated during the day, which will prevent my skin from overproducing oil. I also always love using a liquid foundation that has a nice buildable feature to it, and one that's going to give me a good amount of product without me putting too much of it on my face. I know y'all hear me say that all the time, but I'm very mindful of not putting too much makeup on my face and weighing it down. So for today, I'm going to be using the Oma by Sharon C Flawless IRL foundation, and we're going to apply this in two ways. So we're going to start with applying it with a sponge. For those of you who prefer sponges, I tend to go back and forth. I don't really think I have a favorite between the two, but if you prefer to use a sponge, you definitely want to make sure that your sponge is nice and soft and nice and damp. You don't want to use a dry sponge, because if you're putting a dry sponge onto your face, whether you're going like this or however you're hitting your face with a dry sponge, you may end up lifting whatever texture you might have going on the skin if your sponge is too dry. So you definitely want to make sure it's nice and damp. And because a damp sponge has moisture in it, that's going to add moisture to your skin, and it's going to help you shear out the product so you're not applying as much of it, and that right there is going to help prevent caking during the day because you're not putting too much of the product on your face. So it's actually pretty hard to buff foundation into the skin with a sponge. I mean, you're just naturally going to want to pat it on instead, but you definitely don't want to rub the sponge onto your skin. You definitely want to pat it, because rubbing can cause a lifting motion, which will actually help it'll make your skin look more textured, because you're kind of like lifting things up from off of the skin. So you just want to make sure that you're patting the foundation on. And if you prefer to use a brush with your foundation, same deal. You don't want to buff the makeup into the skin with the brush. You want to apply it in a stippling motion, because if you buff it in, you're going to lift texture and you're going to cause micro exfoliation. So if you have like a breakout that's drying up, you're going to have some flaking going on. If you're buffing your foundation in with a brush, you can actually like lift up some of that stuff that's flaking, as opposed to stippling it on, which is going to help the product like lay flatter onto the skin. So after you have like one layer of foundation applied all over the face, if you need extra coverage in some areas, you don't have to put another layer all over your face. So you always want to be mindful of the amount of product that you're packing onto your skin. You want to be as minimal as possible. So if you need extra coverage in certain areas, you can take some more of your foundation, or you can use a concealer and you can go over just the areas where you need the extra coverage. Don't put extra product in areas where you don't need them. So in my case, I usually need more product on the cheek area, so I like to take a little bit more of my foundation, and that's probably all I need right there. And then I'm just going to concentrate that little bit of product right in the areas where I want more coverage. Okay, so I have already put on my concealer and I've set my under eye. So a lot of people do their makeup in this order, where they'll put their foundation on, then they'll go on to their concealer, then they'll set the concealer, and then they go back to setting the foundation. So if you do your makeup in this order, by the time you go back to your foundation will have been nice and set on its own. Just make sure though that when you put your foundation on, that you do give it some time to set. Even though we're going to further set it with a powder, you want the foundation to kind of set down on its own before you kind of like lock it in with your powder. If you put on your foundation and then immediately go right on top of it with a powder, you're going to create a thicker layer of two products on top of your skin, as opposed to two thinner layers that have both had time to set, like one on top of the other. So just make sure that your foundation is really like set into the skin before you go on top of it with a powder. So speaking of powder, y'all hear me say all the time that I love setting with pressed powders. I think pressed powders just lay on the skin a lot nicer, especially if you're having to set areas that have like fine lines and wrinkles. I think pressed powders just lay on those types of things better than a loose powder. So I'm going to be using my Kosas Cloud Set powder, and then I like to use a brush that looks kind of like this, a pretty dense brush, and I like to pick up a good amount of powder all over the brush, but then I'm also going to tap off the excess, because just like with our foundation, we don't want to put too much powder on our skin either, because everything that we're putting onto the skin is just added stuff on the skin. So again, we just always want to be mindful of how much stuff we're putting on. So I'm going to take about that much powder, and then I'm just going to press it in to the skin, and I'm going around the under eye area because I did already set that with the powder, but I'm just making sure that I am locking the foundation in place. And then just doing the same thing on the other side. So this is what our face is looking like so far. I'm going to throw on some blush and some bronzer, and then I'll come back with one more step. Okay, so one more step toward cake-free foundation is setting spray. Now, I don't always feel the need to use a setting spray, but if you're having issues with your foundation caking up on you, definitely try a setting spray. If you have oily skin, I would definitely choose one that's claiming to be hydrating. There are some mattifying ones out there, but remember what we talked about earlier about using too many products that are mattifying. My favorite setting spray ever is the Fenty one. This is the Fenty Makeup Refreshing Spray. I love the way it sprays out, and I love the way it mists on the skin, and this just feels like it's quenching your skin's thirst, if that makes sense. So I'm going to finish everything off with my Fenty spray. Okay guys, and here's my finished look for today. Per the usual, I'll have everything that I'm wearing in my description box. So those are all of my tips and tricks for preventing cakey foundation for oily, acne-prone skin. If you found this video helpful, let me know by giving me a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel before you head out, and I will see y'all back here for my next one. Until then, take care. Have a good one, y'all. Bye.